Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
Hello, everybody. Again, it's Greg and Mike with the Near Memo. David is out, and this is a special edition where we talk about everything that happened at Google I/O with an emphasis on search and local search in particular. So a lot of people who are watching this either watched the Google I/O keynote, which was yesterday as we record this, or have read about it, read some analysis or some discussion of it. It was pretty interesting. It was weird in certain respects, but let's talk about what the big announcements at I/O before we get into the critique.
So broadly, from my point of view, there was some very interesting hardware announcements. I thought that the Fold was intriguing from an engineering point of view. The new inexpensive Pixel looked pretty nice at $499. Even the idea of pairing a pad with a stand that's also a speaker and a charger made a lot of sense.
Yep.
Something Apple could easily do to create that home device we've always talked about, but not force it into that. I thought that was all interesting stuff. But to some extent, and then they talked about Bard, and they talked about the new search experience, and they talked about their integration with the apps and Google App Update and all this sort of stuff. But somewhere along the line, for me anyways, now again, I'm with you. I'm a bit of a Google skeptic, but I thought that they managed to turn something very exciting into a very boring 2 hours from my point of view. And it was kind of like if everything is AI and the AI came out of their mouth literally every other word, nothing is AI. And they sort of managed to deflate the excitement around that balloon really quickly, about 15 minutes into that whole thing. And announcements like Bard's going to have a black screen. Okay, it's an important thing for people who care about it, but it shouldn't make it into a big annual keynote, should it?
Well, so I share some of your sentiments about it. I mean, the hardware stuff seemed like it was anticlimactic in a certain way, even though that it was cool. And the Fold, I think, Fold is an $1,800 phone, which I think is going to find a small audience because it's so expensive. But it seems like it's a pretty interesting device. The tablet is interesting, as you say. Incidentally, when Alexa first came out, I think I wrote some piece somewhere that Apple needs to leverage its iPad and put a speaker on it and do a speaker, a screen device, but they never did, unfortunately. Maybe they will now. An iPad with a dock, which is a speaker. But I share your perception that the event as a whole, I'll just say it kind of lacked a certain kind of vitality. There was something very flat about it. There was something very bland about it. A lot of the announcements were really significant and interesting, and that was sort of in contrast to this wooden, lackluster presentation. I mean, some of the presenters were stronger than others, but it just lacked vitality. I don't know how else to put it. And Sundar came out and said, AI. We have AI has been in our blood. And we have this new Palm 2 model. And then they proceeded with a lot of discussions of different, Google Workspace and AI and search and AI, which we're going to get to in a second, and then AI and how it integrates with their devices. I think the whole thing was really ultimately a performance more for the market and Wallstreet than it was a presentation for developers. In the past, I've been to a lot of these events. I was at the very first Google I/O in 2008 at the San Jose Convention Center, and it was a showcase of cool stuff that Google was doing, and it for developers, but for other people as well, for the press and the public. And this felt like it felt sort of forced in a way, and it felt like they're also playing catch up in a certain sense, and so this didn't feel as innovative perhaps as it might have if ChatGPT didn't already exist, and if Bing GPT didn't already exist, and if all these things were going on. It really feels like a little bit of a Me Too thing, except that some of the stuff that they're doing is pretty interesting. What was most Yeah.
I mean, just an example, somehow Google Maps immersive view for routes, interesting feature, maybe. Would you use it? Maybe.
Probably not.
Right.
Maybe.
Probably not. Maybe. But it's like it didn't. Or photo magic editor. These are examples of things. Generate emoji wallpapers. These are things that are interesting features to some very small subset, and they use AI. So what? But in terms of really interesting stuff, I mean, the Help Me Write was interesting. The integration of this is something we've talked about. The bringing of the knowledge graph into Bard was incredibly interesting. Again, and the demonstration that they had was fascinating. So
a lot of it felt, parts of it felt really technical to me, like they belonged in the developer keynote. I mean, there was a mix of really sort of accessible information that was designed for a broader public that was watching, via YouTube or whatever. And part of it felt very technical and very, very much geared toward developers. I mean, all the code discussion, for example, beyond sort of saying, this can write code and this can correct your code and so on and so forth. They had a developer keynote that immediately followed this. And some of that material should have been in that developer keynote. So that was kind of a little bit odd.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.